Tonight we are in Luke chapter 22. 2 weeks ago we started it, but we only got a few verses. And I'm going to attempt to cover 49 verses tonight. From 22 to the end of the chapter. It's a big chapter. We'll see how that goes. But up until this point we have dealt with the Last Supper. And now we are coming into Jesus' final night. We will come to him being betrayed, going into the garden. His prayer to the Father. All of these are what we're going to be covering tonight, and then of course next week will be the crucifixion. So we're going to pick up right where we left off last time in verse 21. Luke 22, verse 21. Jesus says at the table, "Yet look, the hand of the man who is betraying me is with me on the table. The Son of Man is going away, just as it has been determined. But how terrible it will be for that man by whom he is betrayed." Then they began to discuss among themselves which one of them was going to do this. Now an argument sprang up among them as to which one of them was regarded as the greatest. The argument goes from, there's a betrayer here, to, hey, I'm the best. Now, I don't know for sure. We don't have it filled in on the details, but maybe it went something like this. Guys, there is a betrayer sitting at this table right now. Who is it, Jesus? Who is it? Who is it? Oh, well, it couldn't be me because, I love you, Lord, and I'd be willing to die for you, as Peter's about to say. It's not going to be me. But I could see John doing it because John doesn't love you as much as I do. Thomas, he's pretty doubtful. So I've got to be better. I'm probably the best one out here because I am absolutely 100% sure that I'm not going to betray you, Jesus. Isn't it wonderful that the church has matured over the last 2,000 years and we don't fight like that anymore? All those, okay, maybe not. Maybe we've still got those problems in churches, right? Not our church. It's got to be those churches over there, those that are less holy, right? We are so close to God, we don't have those kind of arguments in our church. Uh-oh. Maybe we have those same arguments here too. What do you think? After 2,000 years, seems like we still need to work on some things, don't we? Within the next 3 days, the disciples weren't just going to be humbled. They were going to be emptied of every amount of pride in their bodies, in their souls. They were going to be brought to the absolute lowest possible place of pride. When Jesus goes on trial, they're all gone. We often think of Peter's betrayal, oh, how terrible that was. But no, all of the disciples were betrayers because they all ran away at his time of most need. And unfortunately, we can't point the finger either. Because as much as he's done for us, on more than one occasion, and more than I would care to admit, my mouth has been shut when it should have been open. All of us have failed. We have no room to talk about how much better we are than anybody else, because if we look at our track record and we're honest, our track record looks a mess. Verse 25. But Jesus told them, "The kings of the unbelievers lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. But you are not to do so. On the contrary, the greatest among you should become like the youngest, and the one who leads should be like the one who serves. Because who is greater, the one who sits at the table or the one who serves? It's the one who is at the table, isn't it? But I'm among you as one who serves. You are the ones who have always stood by me in my trials. Before we cover verse 28, I want to just talk about this a little bit. When they had meals, they reclined at triclinium's tables, okay? The head of the house would have his most important guests in order. Closest to him on the right and the left were the most important, and then it would move down in importance. And remember, Jesus used that as an illustration in the book of Luke that we've already covered. Don't go in and sit at the highest place, because the guy might say, hey, you don't belong there. And then he throws you down way down below. Jesus says here, you guys have showed up to the table, you've sat down, and you've been waiting for people to feed you. Waiting for people to serve you your meal. Now, at a meal, that would have been a normal thing. Especially the higher up you went in pecking order, the more likely it was that all you had to do was just sit there and your meal would be brought to you. But Jesus says, but I'm here sitting at the table, and I'm the one doing the serving. Because it was that night that he took the towel around his waist and washed their feet. They're over here, we're the best, and he's sitting there, that is the best, and he was the one serving them. He said, if you want to be greatest, start serving. Get on your knees and do the job nobody wants. Instead of sitting there, doing nothing, and expecting somebody to wait on you. Who do you think you are? Notice verse 28. I don't know how many times I've read over this passage in my lifetime, and I have never seen verse 28. Oh, I'm sure I read it, but I never got what it really said. You ever been through there? You just read through a passage and you just kind of blow over it. And as I was studying today, I came across verse 28, and it just stood out to me. Jesus said, you are the ones who have always stood by me in my trials. He's talking to the disciples. This is in the upper room. You and I have the wonderful knowledge of looking back to know that there couldn't be a statement that's further from the truth. Jesus knows what's about to happen. He knows that they are going to strike him, the shepherd, and all the sheep are going to flee. And yet in verse 28, he says, you are the ones who have always stood by me in my trials. You know, if I was Jesus, I'm like, you dopes, I'm about to give my life up for you, and you guys are going to turn tail and run. You bunch of jokers, you bunch of hypocrites, saying you're the best, and within a few hours, you're not even going to be within sight. That's what I would be probably saying. Look what Jesus said in verse 29. And I confirm a kingdom on you, just as my Father has conferred a kingdom on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit down on thrones to govern the 12 tribes of Israel. Say what, Jesus? In a few short hours, they're going to be scattered. They're not going to be near you at all. They're going to be running for their lives. They're going to be lying that they even know you. And Jesus said, and guess what, guys? You've always stuck near me. And because of that, I'm going to make you leadership. I'm going to give you not just leadership now. I'm going to give you leadership for eternity to rule the 12 tribes. What? Aren't you all thankful for a merciful God? That doesn't see us where we've started, but sees us who we are when he completes the job? Yeah, me too. Verse 31. Isn't it amazing? He says, you are the ones that always stick near me. Then he gives them a job to do. And then verse 31, he says, Oh, Simon, Simon. Listen, Satan has asked permission to sift all of you. We often see the you in our English and we think of singular and we pick on Peter. But it's actually, the you is plural. And the ISV here actually gets that right. It says, Satan has asked permission to sift all of you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. Now think about this. He just got done saying that there was a traitor in the midst. He just got done saying that he's going to be betrayed, and it would be better if that joker was never born. And then he calls Simon out. He doesn't even call him Peter. He calls him his original name. He says, oh, Simon, Simon. Now, if anybody in the midst was listening to the conversation, I guarantee you everybody's voice went, oh, it's Peter. Nobody's thinking Judas. Jesus just called Peter out. Forget old Judas. He's sitting on the left-hand side. He's the second most important guy in the room. It has to be Peter. Everyone thought it would be him. And the truth be told, Peter was the only one that was convinced it wasn't. When you think about Peter, and we're going to read it in a little bit, after he betrays Jesus, going out and weeping bitterly. Apply this sentence. For the betrayer that's with us, it would have never been better. It would have been better if he'd have never been born. And then Jesus calls out Simon Peter. Simon Peter got a shakeup of how close he was to eternity. He got a reality check. No wonder he went out and wept bitterly. Now, I'm sure at some point, about the time of the kiss that we're going to read about in a little bit, he's like, oh, it was Judas all along. And then he realized after the cock crowed that, oh, I'm just as bad as Judas. Wouldn't it be terrible for our humility if God gave us a vision of who we really are? I asked for that one time. I preached it in a sermon. I was dumb enough to pray it. Only time I've ever walked off a job in my life. Humiliated, angry, almost lost my job over it. And on the way home, I'm mad and praying, and the song comes on the radio by Phillips, Craig and Dean, When God Ran. And it's the story of the prodigal son, where Jesus, the father, comes running to the prodigal. And he said, Dan, you asked me yesterday who you were. I've given you a glimpse. But aren't you glad I'm forgiving? It was a wake-up call. Peter got that wake-up call. He saw who he really was. He thought he could be one to stand by Jesus' side, to fight to the bitter end. But that's not who he was. Jesus gives him this warning, but then also he gives him a wonderful prophecy. He says, verse 32, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. When you have come back, you must strengthen your brothers. Peter, you're going to fail miserably. Satan has wanted to sift you all like wheat. And guess what, Peter? You're going to fail. But when you do come back after the failure, I got a job for you to do. That reminds me of chapter 21 of John on the seashore of Galilee when he reinstates Peter. It's one of my favorite passages in all of the Bible. I ring very true in my own personal soul with that story. And here is a glimpse of Jesus doing it before the crucifixion even took place. Peter, you are going to fail, but when you come back, I have a job for you to do. And he reinstates him. What a beautiful mercy. Peter didn't believe Jesus, though, and he said, Lord, I am ready to even go to prison and to die with you. But Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not even crow today until you deny me 3 times that you even know me. First of all, that's fantastic detail. Jesus knew everything that was coming. That's fantastic detail on Jesus' part. But I just love the conversation. Oh, Jesus, I'm going to go to prison. I'm willing to die for you. And Jesus is like, buddy, you're not even going to make it through the night. You're going to fail before the sun rises tomorrow. Verse 35. Then Jesus asked his disciples, when I sent you out without a wallet, traveling bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? They replied, nothing at all. Then he said to them, but now whoever has a wallet must take it along, and his traveling bag too. And the one who has no sword must sell his coat and buy one. Jesus says, hey, you all remember when I sent you out 2 by 2 in the peaceful days? Everybody was excited and they would accept you into their homes. They would feed you. They'd take care of you. You remember those days? Yeah, these aren't those days anymore. Because tonight changes everything. And what you're going to face now is you're going to face rejection. You're going to face poverty. You're going to face hunger. You're going to face danger on every side. Tonight changes that. And you'd better be ready. Verse 37, because I tell you, what has been written about me must be fulfilled. He was counted among the criminals. Indeed, what is written about me must be fulfilled. Jesus is quoting Isaiah 53, and he's quoting it of himself. There's some passages you wonder, well, is this about Jesus or is this not? Could this be talking about Jesus in the future, the Messiah, or not? Jesus squelches the questions about Isaiah 53, and he says, this one's about me, and it's going to come true. By the way, we're not going to go into Isaiah 53 tonight, but I dare you. Whew. Powerful passage. Very powerful passage. So they said, look, here are 2 swords. There's 12 of them, 2 swords. That doesn't make much of a fighting force. I don't think Jesus intended the Christians here in the early church to evangelize as the Muslims were intended to evangelize. Convert or die. 2 swords among 12 isn't much of a fighting force. So Jesus answered them, enough of that. In other words, it's time to go. There's more important things at hand that we're going to deal with. So verse 39, then they left and they went to the Mount of Olives, as usual. The disciples went with him. They crossed from into Jerusalem down the Kidron Valley, the same place where David ran for his life from Absalom to fulfill prophecy. Jesus does the same. He comes up to the side of the Mount of Olives. They go into the Garden of Gethsemane. Starting up the Mount of Olives into the Garden of Gethsemane. When they arrived, verse 40, he told them, keep on praying that you may not be tempted. This is another passage, another verse that when I was studying, I don't know how many times I've read through it, but it's never clicked with me what Jesus was saying. I've always thought that Jesus was saying, we're going into troublesome times. I'm going in to pray. Would you just pray with me, you know. But he doesn't. He's going to face the greatest temptation all humanity has ever faced. When he faced Satan in the wilderness, that wasn't much compared to what's going to take place right now. We don't have it recorded for us, but we do know that he sweats drops of blood. We know it was bad. He's going to come under the greatest temptation, fiercest temptation that any human has ever faced. And what does he tell his disciples? I want you all to stay here and pray so that you don't fall into temptation. You don't have to worry about praying for me. Just pray for you. That blows my mind. Verse 41, then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw. He knelt down and he began to pray. Father, if you are willing, take this cup away from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. The other Gospels tells us that he does this 3 different times. But it also tells us if there was any other way to salvation, other than through Jesus' death and resurrection, it would have taken place. But Jesus still took the cup. He prayed 3 different times, if there's any other way. And God came back, the Father, every time, saying, no, this is the only way. Salvation is only through Jesus. He's the way, the truth, and the life. Yes, that means the way is narrow. Yes, that means it's selective. But it is the only door to salvation. If there was any other way, Jesus didn't need to die. But then also notice what he says there. Not my will, but yours be done. I was listening to a testimony today. If any of you want it, I will send it to you on Facebook. My grandmother actually sent it to me. But it was a personal testimony of a man that was a Hezbollah fighter that while he was, I'll send it to you, Kaylee. While he was in jail, Jesus showed up in the room and he was converted. It's an excellent story. It's just so powerful. But, I mean, and obviously having Jesus show up in a room, that's pretty miraculous. But as he was telling the story and his own personal testimony, what shocked me was when he got out, he was put in jail in Malaysia, I think. He was born and raised in Iran. And he goes to Malaysia. Both of those places, it is not a good place to be a Christian. Anywhere in either one of those countries. But I don't remember when he got out. I don't know if he went back to Iran or to Malaysia. But regardless, he said the first place after he got out that he went was to the Muslim mosque. And he told everybody about Jesus. Can you imagine doing that in Iran or Malaysia? Either one. He said, oh yeah, my dad's tried to kill me several times. Jesus said, if there's any other way, let me do that. But not my will, yours be done. How many of us have been willing to say that when our life's on the line? In most Christians' lives, they're not even willing to hurt their pocketbook, much less their own physical body. They're not willing to give till it hurts. They're only willing to give what doesn't hurt. And yet Jesus said, not my will, but yours be done, even if it costs me my life. Is it too much for Jesus to ask that we give our lives to him? Is it unreasonable when he gave it for us? I don't think so. And I'll be honest, that's pretty stinking convicting for even the pastor. Lord, I'm willing to do your will. And whatever it is, even if it's my life. But I'll be honest, if there's any other way. Verse 43. Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. Only Luke tells this part of it, and he shows how Jesus had human weakness and needed help. Verse 44, in Jesus' anguish he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like large drops of blood falling on the ground. Again, Luke, the doctor, is the only one to mention this out of the Gospels. When he got up from prayer, he went to the disciples, and he found them asleep from sorrow. He asked them, why are you sleeping? Get up and keep on praying. And he says it again, that you may not be tempted. You know, we're about to see where Peter falls the worst. If Peter would have been praying, I wonder if he'd have fallen like he did. It's a good question. How would the story have changed if Peter wouldn't have fallen asleep here? Can't know, I guess. Verse 47. While Jesus was still speaking, a crowd arrived. The man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them, and he came close to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? How bitter that must have hurt Jesus. After all that time with Jesus, and to be so cold to betray him with the kiss of friendship and embrace. Judas' life should be a warning to us. He sat under the holy word, teaching holy word in person. He watched the creator of all things master the wind and the waves with his voice. He ate as the bread of life miraculously provided a meal for thousands until they were glutted. He experienced that and so much more that it couldn't be recorded because the earth couldn't handle it, John said. All of that, and he still became so cold, Judas could betray the Son of God with the embrace of friendship. If Judas could do that sitting under Jesus, and you're sitting under my preaching, all of us better watch out. Amen. When those who were around Jesus saw what was about to take place, they asked, Lord, should we attack with our swords? Then one of them, we know Peter from the other passages, struck Malchus, the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. Peter, the word is cleaved. He wasn't trying to Three Musketeers it, stick you with a point. No, he was at the chopping block and going to take the guy's head off. Malchus is just fortunate that Peter was a fisherman and not a swordsman. Now, I'm not saying that Jesus probably couldn't have healed even if he lost his head, but it had just been a lot more messy. I think here Peter was willing to actually do what Jesus said, or what he said earlier to Jesus, excuse me. He was willing to die with Jesus. And I can get that. I'm willing to go down in the blaze of glory for what I love and care about and stand for, right? I'm willing to stand strong and yell freedom before I die, like William Wallace in Braveheart, even though it was a terrible way to go. I'm willing to do that. And I think Peter was too. Peter was the only one that pulled out a sword. The other passages tell us it was against a cohort. It was against 600 men. He's the only guy with a sword defending Jesus, standing next to Jesus. He was willing to go down fighting. What Peter was not willing to do was to go out quietly with his head hung low in humility. You see, that's a different ballgame, isn't it? I'll go out with a fight, but I won't go out like this. John 21, that's exactly what Jesus talked about. Jesus says, Peter, one of these days they're going to tie you up and they're going to take you where you don't want to go. And Peter says, well, what about that guy talking about John? Don't worry about John, I'm worried about you, Peter. Are you willing to go out? And then he was ended up crucified upside down. But Jesus said no more of this. So he touched the wounded man's ear and healed him. This is Jesus' last recorded miracle before his death. And think about it, with all 600 guys around, you watch this guy's ear literally get hacked off with one swipe. Jesus reattach it for healing, and you still arrest him. These are all the temple guards and all of that. They've seen Jesus healing up close and personal. All of them saw it. And it didn't change him one lick. Then Jesus told the high priest and the temple police and the elders who had come for him, why have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit? While I was with you day after day in the temple, you didn't lay a hand on me. But this is your hour, when darkness reigns. You see it here just a little bit, but in John's gospel, it's very blatant. Jesus was in full control here. The other passages tell us when he mentions his name, when they're looking for him, they fall, all of them, all 600 fall down before him. He's the one that hurries up the trials. He's the one giving directions. He's the one giving orders, asking questions. In the trial, they couldn't even get the trial to work right. All of their witnesses were lying against each other. Jesus has to put them on the spot so they can actually convict him. This is not what happened to Jesus. It's that Jesus gave up his life for us. He was in complete control. No one's taking my life. I give it up willingly. And that comes out more in John. But there's a great quote. I don't know if this was actually Chuck Missler or he was quoting somebody else, but I'm going to give him credit because that's where I saw it. A God who is in control when the foundations of his own earthly existence are crumbling is a God who can be trusted to sustain us when it appears our own life is tumbling in. That's pretty fitting. Verse 54. Then they arrested him. They led him away and brought him to the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. When they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had taken their seats, Peter too sat down among them. As we've mentioned before, Peter's failure is pretty evident here. He's first mentioned to be by Jesus' side in the garden. Then he's following at a distance. Now he's warming himself by the enemy's fire. And soon he will be outside weeping bitterly. A servant girl saw him sitting by the fire and stared at him and said, "This man was with him too." But he denied it. "I don't know him, woman," he responded. A little later, a man looked at him and said, "You are one of them too." But Peter said, "Mister, I am not." About an hour later, another man emphatically asserted, "This man was certainly with him because he's Galilean. You're not from around these parts." But Peter said, "Mister, I don't know what you're talking about." Just then, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. Then the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. And Peter remembered the word from the Lord and how he had told him, "Before a rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. This wasn't a look of condemnation. This wasn't a look of, "I told you so." This was a look of mercy. Jesus could have went on and just ignored Peter for his failure. But he didn't. He looked back in mercy. "Peter, I knew it all along. And the word came true, but the words will also come true." So Peter went outside, verse 62, and cried bitterly. Even though by closeness physically, in proximity, this is the furthest Peter has been all night from Jesus, he's actually now the closest to Jesus that he's ever been. Psalm 34, verse 18, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and deliver those whose spirit has been crushed." After we've sinned and we've really messed up, the closest we can possibly be to Jesus is when we hit our knees. I preached on it a couple weeks ago. We're only ever one step away from God at any moment. And it's just turning around. No matter how far he feels from us, no matter how distant we may think he is, we are always one step away. One motion, as we talked about with Saul on the road to Damascus. It's dropping to our knees. Verse 63. Then the men who were holding Jesus in custody began to make fun of him while they beat him. They blindfolded him and asked him over and over again, "Prophesy, who is the one who hit you?" And they kept insulting him in many other ways. You know, if Jesus knew the background of the woman at the well, I bet the Holy Spirit could have given him all the secrets of their life. and yet he didn't open his mouth once. As soon as it came day, the elders of the people, the high priests, and the scribes assembled and brought him before their council. They said, "If you're the Messiah, tell us." But he told them, "If I tell you, you won't believe me. And if I ask you a question, you won't answer me. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God." Then they all asked. Now notice, verse 67, 68, 69, and 70, and 71. These are like 6 sentences total. He just got done. They were saying, "Tell us if you're the Messiah." He says, "If I tell you, you won't believe me." Verse 70, then they all asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" And he answered them and said, "You said it, I am." "Why do we need any more testimony?" they asked. "We have heard from ourselves with his own mouth." He just got done telling them, you want to know the truth. If I tell you the truth, you don't get it. You won't believe. So I tell them the truth. I am. And they don't believe. This right here is the reason Jesus was crucified. Non-believers claim that Jesus never claimed himself to be God. But he does it right here and absolutely enrages the Sanhedrin. And this is the reason they killed him. He answers them in this way. He says, "You said it. I am ego eimi." And this is the name that he told Moses from the burning bush, because he was the presence in the burning bush. This is the name that John recorded 7 different times in his gospel. I am. I am the self-existent one. I exist because I exist, in their translation. Let's go through those really quickly before we go. John has it listed 7 different times where Jesus quoted this phrase, "I am the bread of life." John chapter 6. Jesus alone can sustain us, who are but starving beggars looking for food. "I am the light of the world." John chapter 8. Jesus is the original and eternal source of light in the universe for us who are spiritually blind from birth. Jesus said, "I am the door." Jesus is the only door to life for us who are lost outside of God's will. John chapter 10. "I am the good shepherd." John chapter 10 also. Jesus knows and cares for us who are orphaned, wandering sheep without a shepherd. John chapter 11, he said, "I am the resurrection and the life." Jesus is the key to escaping spiritual death for us who are hopelessly doomed to death because of our sin. The 6th one, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," in John chapter 14. Jesus is the accessible path, the illuminating truth, and the giver of life for us who are lost, ignorant, and dead without him. And then the 7th one, "I am the true vine." Jesus is the source of eternal life for us who are dead and useless branches apart from him. John chapter 15. Jesus says, "You want to know if I'm the Messiah? You said it that I am. I am everything that anyone would need for salvation. My life is sufficient for every need, for the lost to be found, for the dead to be alive, for those that are hungry to be fed, for those that are thirsty to be quenched. I am." Peter gets a bad rap. And he gets a lot of grief from us pastors. But before we're too harsh on him, I want to remind us how we have failed too. Looking at his life, do we speak when we should listen? Peter had a problem with that, but I'll be honest, I do too. Do we argue when we should just simply obey? Do we sleep when we should pray? Do we fight when we should submit? Peter repented, and Jesus met him personally. Luke chapter 24, verse 34. We don't know the occasion. It's not recorded for us what took place. That was personal between Jesus and Peter. But after his resurrection, Jesus showed up personally to Peter. And then in John chapter 21, he reinstated Peter publicly before all of the disciples. More than just what he said here in the upper room, that Peter, when you do come back, encourage your brothers. More than that, he gave him all kinds of jobs to do. I don't know. As I look at Peter's life, I see how I've failed the Lord as well. I can't point fingers at Peter because I've been there. But I am so thankful for a merciful God that even after I've failed and I've fallen short, all it takes is asking him to forgive me. And the communion is there once again. He's right there to catch me. Lord, help us. Lord, keep us from temptation. And Lord, help us to hold on to you for dear life. Let's pray together. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.